that flow states, that's what we're discussing there, where everything feels so so good. Whatever the demands of the environment, of the situation that you're in, matches your ability perfectly. And you have this beautiful tunnel vision where you feel, I'm a big Harry Potter nerd, so you feel like you've taken that felicitas, oh God, now I didn't even pronounce it right. Where like everything is going perfectly and you feel excellent. So that flow state that we all strive for because it feels so good. But I would say in sport, and sometimes, and in life too, whenever we're acquiring kind of a new skill, that flow state is what we want to strive for at the end. So when we're giving that kind of performance, we want to feel like we're in control of the scenario, whether we're a musician and we're performing in front of a crowd, we've kind of mastered that fear of crowds, of performing, we feel like we're in total control. But when we're practicing, when we're learning a skill, we almost want to avoid feeling comfortable. We want to engage in something called deliberate practice, where we're always performing, we're always working a little bit past our realm, our comfort zone, our realm of ability. We're working towards a very, very specific goal for that session. And we're engaging in that for long enough of time that we're actually consolidating that skill. And deliberate practice does not feel good. It feels pretty awful. We're constantly butting up against failure. We're butting up against our own abilities. And kind of our mind is screaming for us to put down the instrument, put down the paintbrush, put down whatever that tool is and walk away. So I always think there's kind of two minds in terms of practice and then performance, and that in practice, we need to strive towards that failure point so that we can engage in that growth mindset afterwards. But then when it comes time for the performance, we are no longer trying to acquire new skills. We need to get into that meditative state, into that flow state, so that we feel like we're in full control and we are able to experience that kind of euphoria moment. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two.
Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely painted the other side of the coin perfectly. I don't think I could put it very much better myself. And yeah, you need to, during practice, as a coach, as an athlete, you should be actually pushing your athletes to failure, which I think is something that's interesting in I'd say almost all athletic climate, is that coaches want success all the time. And something that I strive for in my athletes is pushing them to fail almost, I'd say more than half the time. I actually I did a lecture a while ago, and I was talking about the idea of psychological development from I try to take more of a naturalist perspective. So I talk about it as a tree. And so the canopy of the tree is our conscious comfort zone. And then the role of the canopy is to push water to the outskirts so that our root system can grow outwards past the canopy. And then once the root system grows outwards, then that more consolidates the stability of the tree. And then that allows for the canopy to grow outwards more. So it's constantly this idea of allocating resources towards the unconscious. And then once the unconscious is able to integrate that, then it allows for growth outside. So that would kind of be the difference between the root system or the unconscious would be something you're trying to develop in practice. And then in a performance setting, you're trying to maintain the canopy and expand the canopy so that you're able to that's the idea of optimal performance, is that you're not really going outside of what you are, but you're just doing the things that you know to do so well. And something that lots of people do in sport is trying to attain perfection in practice and in games, where especially volleyball is just a game of errors. Every single movement could be defined as an error, whether you're not in the right place or that could be it. You're just not in the right place. Someone hits over top of you and you didn't jump high enough. Someone wasn't in the right place for defense. You should always be reading the game, all of these things. So it's interesting that I think failure is now becoming more of an appropriate topic in sport, whereas before it was the striving for perfection at all times. So I think you described the difference between those two things really well. I think that there's definitely a mindset for practice, and there's definitely a mindset for competition and being your best when your best is needed.
Yeah, and I love that tree canopy analogy, and that also too, the canopy is what's visible, and what's being shown off in front of spectators, in front of fans. Whereas that enormous root system underneath the ground, that's invisible. That's only what's seen perhaps with what your coach and your teammates, but even just you for something that's a little bit more private. Maybe that's the mental work that you're doing behind closed doors. And it's not something that you can show off, but that's integral, because as soon as you have a setback, let's say you have a really windy day, if you don't have that invisible root system set up, you're going to get blown over. It's not glamorous, it's not pretty. It's sometimes even, I think a term you and I both know is training ugly.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good, but that root system is what keeps you afloat, keeps you standing.
Right. The place where I came up with the analogy was I went to somewhere, it's called the Biosphere 2 down here in Phoenix, and the biosphere being the Earth, and then the Biosphere 2 was a project taken on by NASA, I believe. And what they did was they built this giant dome. It kind of looked like the Epcot Center, and they sent people in there to live for a year. And something they found was that the tree started to fall over. And a part of that was because there was no wind. So there was no, you could term it as adversity. There was no adversity shaking the tree. And wind is actually something that I think now I would say this is a hypothesis, but I'm sure it could be tested, that wind is something that initiates a signal for root growth. So it promotes roots to grow down deeper and stronger and just grab on tighter. So if you don't have that adversity, that wind pushing back and forth, then your roots don't grow out as far. And also with watering, so we have a few citrus trees here that I'm very specific about the way that we water them, because if you water them at the base, then it doesn't promote the roots to grow outwards. So you actually want to water around where the canopy actually is. So that promotes it to grow outwards. And if you any of the trees that you see that come out of the ground, you can probably predict, if they're planted by people, you can probably predict that the watering system is only underneath the canopy. So you have this watering system that's pretty much an oil drummer of that's where the water's going, so the root doesn't have to stretch outwards at all. So I think that's an interesting comparison to adversity as well, and how adversity, that failure, that actually creates a proclivity for growth, and it creates the environment for growth.
We cannot become, the very definition of perseverance is that you have to come up against some sort of adversity, some sort of setback, and then return to either your levels, whatever that might be, before the incident, or even better than before the incident. But there has to be a setback at the beginning. So I think in order for us to become more perseverant, we have to come up against those setback experiences. But that's not to say that we need to come out of that or go through that alone. I think that support system, the rest of the forest, the rest of that ecosystem, the support system around us is so important to help us move through those adversity experiences. And it's much more difficult to move through a setback alone than it is with other people, with trusted friends, with coaches, with parents, etc.
Right. Well, bamboo does that. It's so cool to see. Bamboo, it grows outwards and down. So what'll happen with bamboo is if a branch breaks off, it comes into the ground, and then the root system will grow. And the roots will grow outwards, and then they'll start to shoot up. And that's how you get bamboo shoots. And a part of that is a bamboo forest will be this unbelievably complex grid, in that they're growing over top and underneath one another. And that's that community that you're talking about, is that they're holding each other in place. And if one starts to stray or stress, then other ones are there to hold down the roots on the other side of it and keep it there. It's very, very cool to see.
Beautiful. So we should all strive to be like bamboo.
Bamboo and deep-rooted trees.